3 years ago, my wife signed a debt note that transformed our marriage, making her my perfect unpaid employee serving an impossible debt. Today is September 1st. For most people, it's just the day after August, the unofficial end of summer. But for me, it's an anniversary. It's been exactly 3 years since my wife Isabella signed her life away. 1,095 days down, 2,555 to go. My name is Theodore Hernandez. I'm 38, and I run a business that is against all odds finally becoming successful. From the outside, it probably looks like I have a perfect partner. My wife Isabella is 35. She's smart, she's efficient, and she's here every single day from the moment I open the doors to the moment I lock them. She never takes a sick day. She never complains about the workload. She does exactly what I tell her to do, precisely when I tell her to do it. She is the perfect employee, except she isn't an employee. She doesn't get a paycheck, benefits, or a title. She gets room and board and the quiet, simmering satisfaction of knowing she is slowly, painstakingly paying off an impossible debt. Our office is a study in cold efficiency. My desk is a large slab of dark wood positioned to overlook the small, open-plan space. Hers is a simple, functional workstation tucked into the corner. When I need something, I don't use her name with affection. I say, "Isabella, I need the quarterly projections." She'll reply, "Yes, Theodore," right away. There are no pet names, no terms of endearment. Not here, not ever. We are a CEO and his subordinate, a creditor and his debtor. We stopped being husband and wife a long time ago. The silence between us is a physical thing. It follows us home from the office. We drive in separate cars. We enter the house we once bought together, a house that was supposed to be filled with laughter and plans for the future, and now it's just quiet. We eat dinner at opposite ends of a long dining table, the clinking of our forks against the plates, the only sound. Afterwards, she cleans the kitchen with meticulous care and I retreat to my home office. She goes to her room, what used to be the guest room, and I go to mine. We are two ghosts haunting the same space, bound together by a single piece of paper locked in my desk drawer. That piece of paper is the reason for all of this. It's a simple document typed by me. It isn't notarized and probably wouldn't hold up in any real court, but it's the most powerful object in our world. I call it the debt note. Sometimes late at night when the house is still and I know she's asleep, I'll open the top drawer of my desk. It slides open with a soft, satisfying sound, and there it is, a single sheet of cream-colored paper folded neatly in three. I'll pick it up. The paper feels heavy, substantial. I unfold it and read the words I wrote myself in a moment of cold, clarifying rage. The principal value is listed at the top, $500,000. Interest rate 0%. I wasn't a monster, I told myself. I wasn't trying to profit from this. I just wanted what was mine. Repayment method, uncompensated labor for my business entity. Term 120 months, 10 years. Start date September 1st, 2021. Scheduled end date August 31st, 2031. And there at the bottom is her signature. Isabella Rossi. It's a little shaky, a little smudged probably from the tears that were streaming down her face when she signed it. But it's there, her agreement, her sentence. It all started 6 years ago in 2018. My grandfather passed away and left me his life savings, $500,000. It was a premarital asset, an investment account in my name and my name alone. It was my safety net, my future, the seed capital for the business I'd always dreamed of starting. A year later in 2019, I married Isabella. I loved her, or at least I loved the person I thought she was. I was so careful with that inheritance. I never commingled it with our joint funds. I told her it was the foundation of our future, the key to everything we wanted to build together. She had access to view the account, a sign of trust, but she had no legal right to it. It was my legacy. Then came May of 2021. The world was going crazy for crypto, and Isabella got the fever. She saw people becoming millionaires overnight. She started talking about it constantly, about how we were missing out, how my conservative investments were leaving money on the table. I was cautious. I told her it was too risky, that the $500,000 was not gambling money. It was foundational. She didn't listen. One afternoon, while I was tied up in meetings, she did it. She saw a dip in the market that she was convinced was the buy of a lifetime. Using the access I had given her out of trust, she transferred the entire portfolio, every last cent of my grandfather's money, into some obscure high-risk crypto exchange. She didn't wait for my consent. She just did it. She called me later that evening, breathless with excitement, telling me she just made us rich. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. Before I could even fully process the betrayal, the market turned. On May 19th, 2021, the entire crypto world imploded. The crypto crash. I watched the portfolio's value plummet in real time, from $500,000 to $50,000 to 5 and then to effectively zero. It was gone. All of it. Irrecoverable. My grandfather's legacy, my business plan, our future, vaporized in a matter of hours because of her arrogance and greed. The weeks that followed were a blur of hollow apologies and endless tears. She was a wreck, a shattered, guilt-ridden shell of the woman I married. But I couldn't feel any sympathy. I felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness where my trust used to be. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. That would have been a release, and I didn't want to release anything. I wanted to contain it, to control it. On September 1st, 3 years ago today, I sat her down at the dining room table. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out the facts. She had lost $500,000 of my money, a sum she could never hope to repay. But I told her there was a way for her to make it right, a path to redemption. I slid the debt note across the table. She read it, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a strange, desperate relief, the relief of someone being given a concrete penance for an unforgivable sin. 10 years of her life. That was the price. She picked up the pen with a trembling hand and signed her name. In that moment, our marriage ended and this arrangement began. Now I look at her across the office. She's staring intently at her monitor, probably refining a client proposal. Her face is pale, her shoulders always slightly slumped as if she's carrying a physical weight. And she is. She's carrying the weight of what she did. Every keystroke, every phone call, every single task she completes for this business is a tiny chip off that massive block of debt. I fold the note carefully along its original creases and slide it back into the drawer. The wood whispers shut and the lock clicks into place. 3 years down, 7 to go. It feels like balance. She broke our future, so now she has to build mine. It's the only way. It's the only thing that makes any sense at all. The rhythm of our lives for the past 3 years has been one of meticulous, predictable order. I wake at 6. She is already up making coffee. She places a black mug on my side of the kitchen island, a silent daily offering. We don't speak. There is nothing to say. I am her employer. She is my debtor. The house is just a location where we both happen to sleep. The real work, the real repayment happens at the office. My business, the one I had planned to launch with my inheritance, is now a modest but growing consultancy firm. I built it from scratch with what little I had left, fueled by a cold hard fire. Isabella is my only employee. She doesn't draw a salary. Her compensation is the slow, agonizing reduction of a number that is never spoken aloud, but is felt in every interaction, $500,000. She does the work of 3 people. She manages the books, handles client communications, drafts proposals, and organizes my entire schedule. She is ruthlessly efficient. There is a purity to her labor because it isn't diluted by ambition or the desire for a promotion. It is penance. It is the only thing she has. I often find myself watching her work, not with admiration, but with a kind of clinical satisfaction. I see the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, and I see justice. I see the scales balancing one 60-hour work week at a time. This particular week, however, the rhythm was about to be disrupted. We had landed a meeting with a major potential client, a logistics firm called Sterling Dynamics. Landing their account would be a game changer, the kind of contract that could finally elevate my company from a struggling startup to a serious player. The kind of success I was owed. For 2 solid weeks we prepared. I dictated the strategy, the broad strokes, the vision. Isabella's job was to fill in the details, to build the intricate scaffolding of data and projections that would support my pitch. She worked late every night, the glow of her monitor the only light on in the office as I left. I never thanked her. Gratitude is for partners. She was a tool, an asset, and she was simply performing her function. The day of the meeting arrived. It was held at their corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that made my small leased office feel like a shoebox. We were ushered into a boardroom that overlooked the entire city. At the head of the massive oak table sat Marcus Sterling, the company's founder and CEO. He was in his late 50s with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze that seemed to dissect you as you spoke. I began the presentation. I was polished, confident. I walked him through the market analysis, the strategic overhauls I was proposing, the potential for growth. Sterling listened intently, nodding occasionally, his face unreadable. Isabella sat to my right, silent and still, her laptop open, ready to pull up any supporting data I might require. She was a prop, a part of the presentation. Her role was to be invisible, efficient, and quiet. About 20 minutes in, I was explaining a complex supply chain optimization I had designed. Sterling held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "It's an elegant theory, Mr. Hernandez," he said, his voice calm but probing. "But my people have run models like this before. The weak point is always the initial supplier integration, the transition period. Your projection shows only a 7% efficiency drop in the first quarter. We project it would be closer to 15, wiping out any potential gains for the first year. How do you account for that discrepancy?" It was a sharp, unexpected jab aimed right at the heart of my proposal. I had a canned answer ready, something about proprietary algorithms and phased rollouts. But before I could speak, Isabella moved. It was a small, almost imperceptible shift, but my attention snapped to her. She leaned forward slightly and said, her voice quiet but clear, "Mr. Sterling, if you look at Appendix C on your tablet, you'll see a comparative analysis of 3 different integration protocols. The standard model, which you're referring to, does indeed have a 15% drop, but we're not proposing the standard model." Sterling's eyes flicked to his tablet, then back to her. My jaw tightened. She was supposed to wait for my signal. Isabella continued, pointing to a specific graph on her own screen. "Theodore's strategy hinges on a parallel implementation system. Instead of a hard switchover, we run the old and new systems concurrently for a 6-week period using a dynamic load balancing software that I benchmarked last month. It increases initial overhead by about 3%, but it smooths the transition and virtually eliminates the productivity drop. The 7% figure isn't a projection. It's the mean result from 3 separate stress tests." The room was silent. I stared at her. Where had that come from? The parallel system was a minor idea I'd tossed out weeks ago and forgotten. She had taken that fragment, that stray thought, and built an entire, fully tested implementation model around it. She had done it without my direct instruction, without asking for permission. Sterling leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Isabella. "That," he said, the word ringing with genuine admiration, "is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You've just solved a problem my team has been wrestling with for the last 6 months." He looked from her to me, then back to her. "Isabella, what's your official title here?" "Isabella, Director of Operations, Chief Strategist." The air in the room went cold. The question hung there, a direct challenge to the unspoken order of my world. I saw a flicker in Isabella's eyes, a spark I hadn't seen in 3 years. It was a ghost of the woman she used to be, confident, bright, alive. For the first time since she signed that note, she wasn't looking at me with the vacant compliance of a debtor. She was looking at Marcus Sterling, a respected peer, and she was being seen as a professional. My mind raced. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let him build her up. It would upset the balance. It would give her ideas. I needed to pull the focus back to me, to reassert the hierarchy. I forced a chuckle, placing a proprietary hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Isabella is an invaluable member of the team," I said, my voice smooth and condescending. "She's fantastic at fleshing out the details of my strategies. A real asset in implementation." I emphasized the words "my" and "implementation," subtly demoting her from architect to assistant in a single sentence. I was putting her back in her box. Sterling's smile faded slightly. He saw what I was doing. But Isabella? She heard it too. I watched that tiny spark in her eyes dim, the light retracting as she lowered her gaze back to her laptop. Her shoulders slumped back into their familiar defeated posture. The moment was over. Balance was restored. The rest of the meeting was a success. Sterling was sold. We hammered out the preliminary details of a contract that was larger than I had ever dreamed. As we shook hands and left the boardroom, I should have been ecstatic. This was the win I'd been working for. This was proof that my hard work, my vision, was paying off. But all I felt was a gnawing unease. The elevator ride down was silent. The walk through the marble lobby was silent. The car ride home was a new kind of silent. It wasn't the comfortable, empty silence of our established routine. It was a heavy charged silence, thick with unspoken thoughts. I kept glancing over at her. She was staring out the passenger window, but I knew she wasn't seeing the city go by. She was replaying that moment in the boardroom. The praise, the question, my answer. I could feel something shifting a tectonic plate deep beneath the surface of our arrangement. For 3 years, I had been her entire world. Her judge, her jury, her warden. My opinion was the only one that mattered. My perception of her was her reality. But today, someone else had looked at her and seen something different. They hadn't seen a debtor paying her dues. They had seen a brilliant professional, a peer, an equal. And the most dangerous part was, for a split second, I think she saw it too. When we got home, she went straight to her room. We hadn't shared one since the day the money was lost, and I went to my office. I unlocked the desk drawer and pulled out the debt note. I unfolded it, the paper soft and worn at the creases. Her signature at the bottom seemed to mock me. It was a symbol of my control, a testament to my power over her. But after today, it felt weaker, more fragile. I had built this entire system to correct a wrong, to impose a logical, mathematical solution on an emotional catastrophe. 10 years of labor for $500,000. It was a simple, clean equation, but Marcus Sterling had just introduced a new variable, an unknown quantity. I hadn't accounted for her own sense of self-worth. I sat there for a long time just holding the piece of paper. The seed had been planted. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I would have to do something to crush it before it had a chance to grow. I slid the debt note back into the drawer and turned the key. The faint click of the lock echoed in the silent office. It was a sound of order, of security. But it felt hollow. A lock is only useful if the person on the other side respects the door. For the first time in 3 years, I had the distinct feeling Isabella was thinking about kicking it down. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. Every whisper of the wind sounded like a secret being told. I was listening for a change, and the anticipation was its own kind of torture. The next morning, I laid out my plan. Subtlety was over. It was time for a clear, undeniable demonstration of the hierarchy. I found her in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee, with the same distant look she'd had in the car. She was already dressed for work, her mind no doubt churning with strategies for the Sterling account. It was the perfect opportunity. I dropped a heavy, 5-inch thick stack of paper on the kitchen island. The thud made her jump. "Morning," I said, my voice deliberately flat. "New priority." She looked from my face to the mountain of paper. It was a chaotic mix of archived invoices, old project proposals, and client correspondence, all from before we even started the company. "What is this?" she asked. "That," I said, tapping the top page, "is our entire company history. It's a mess. I need it all digitized, manually. Every page scanned, converted to text, formatted, and filed into a new digital archive." I paused for effect. "And after that, I want you to collate all of my handwritten journals from the last 5 years. Transcribe everything." A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. "But the Sterling proposal, the preliminary models are due by the end of the week. Marcus is expecting—" "Marcus Sterling can wait," I snapped, harsher than I intended. I softened my tone, cloaking the command in the language of business. "This is foundational. We can't build a future if our past is disorganized. This is the work now. Understood?" I was expecting a fight, an argument, tears even. That's what the old Isabella would have done. Instead, she just looked at the pile of paper, then back at me. Her expression was unreadable. "Understood," she said, her voice quiet but not defeated. It was observational, like she was a scientist studying a strange, predictable specimen. The lack of an emotional reaction was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. For the next week, the house was filled with the soft hum of the scanner and the rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of her keyboard. She worked with a detached diligence that drove me insane. She never complained. She never sighed. She just did the work. I would walk by the spare room she used as an office and see her there, surrounded by stacks of paper, her eyes fixed on the screen. She was performing the most menial, soul-crushing tasks I could devise, tasks designed to remind her that her mind wasn't what I valued, only her time. But it didn't seem to be breaking her. It seemed to be focusing her. The cold silence we used to live in was gone. It had been replaced by a tense, vibrating quiet. Every interaction was a chess move. When I'd ask her a question, she would pause before answering, her eyes holding mine just a second too long. One evening, I reviewed a batch of the files she had digitized. I found a minor formatting error, a single misplaced indent on page 247. It was nothing, but it was an excuse. This is sloppy, I said, holding the tablet out to her. 3 weeks ago, she would have mumbled, I'm sorry, I'll fix it. But this time she took the tablet, looked at the page, and then looked back at me. What specifically is the error, she asked. The question was so simple, so reasonable. But coming from her to me, it felt like a gunshot. She wasn't apologizing. She was asking for clarification. She was demanding a professional standard for me, the same standard I was enforcing on her. She was refusing to accept a blanket criticism. The indent, I said through gritted teeth. It's not aligned with the others. Okay, she said, nodding slowly. I'll correct it. She turned back to her computer, and I stood there feeling an absurd sense of rage. She had won the exchange. By staying calm, by refusing to be emotionally cowed, she had flipped the power dynamic of that tiny moment. And I just knew it was the start of something. My paranoia grew. I started paying more attention to what she was doing when she wasn't transcribing my old notes. Her laptop was always angled away from the door. When I entered a room, she would switch tabs with a speed that was just a little too fast. The quiet tapping from her room late at night no longer sounded like work. It sounded like plotting. The breaking point came 2 weeks into her sentence of menial labor. It was nearly 1 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed her room, I saw a sliver of light from under the door. It was supposed to be her bedroom, a place of rest, but I knew she was in there working, or something. On impulse, I stopped my ear close to the wood. I heard nothing but the familiar, soft clicking of keys. Driven by a suspicion I couldn't shake, I crept to my office and logged into our router's administrative panel. I could see all the devices connected to our network. Hers was active. I ran a search on her browsing history. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a long list of innocuous sites, but then I saw it. Page after page, link after link, from legal aid websites, forums, and state government pages. Enforceability of private debt agreements. Spousal labor laws. What is indentured servitude? Psychological coercion in marriage. My blood ran cold. The screen glowed in the dark office, illuminating a truth I had refused to consider. She wasn't broken. She wasn't compliant. She was building a case. She was gathering ammunition. For 3 years, I had held a single piece of paper over her head, a symbol of her debt. And she had spent the last 2 weeks building an arsenal to burn it to the ground. The seed planted by Marcus Sterling hadn't been crushed. It had taken root in the dark, and it was growing into something that would tear my entire world apart. The confrontation I was expecting didn't happen. The next few days were excruciatingly normal on the surface. She finished transcribing my journals. She organized the digital files. She did everything I asked with that same unnerving calm. But now I knew what was behind it. It wasn't acceptance. It was strategy. She was finishing her tasks to prove a point. She was closing the loop on my terms before introducing hers. The day came on a Saturday. I was in my office reviewing the Sterling contract when she walked in without knocking. She didn't look angry or scared. She looked serene. In her hands were 2 things. One was the debt note, which she must have taken from my unlocked drawer. The other was a stack of printed pages. She walked to my desk and placed them side by side on the polished wood. The debt note with her looping, desperate signature from 3 years ago, and next to it a printout from a legal website with sections highlighted in yellow. The header was clear: U.S. Code Title 18 Section 1581, peonage, obstructing enforcement. I was looking for some old tax documents, she said, her voice even, and I found something else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. My old journal from 2018, before the wedding, before everything. I hadn't seen it in years. I read it, she continued. I read all your plans for the $500,000. The business was part of it, yes, but it wasn't all of it. A down payment on a house, a trip to Spain, a fund for our future kids. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not guilt or fear, but a profound, weary sadness. You wrote about our future, our money. When I lost that money, I didn't just lose your inheritance. I lost that future, and I believed I deserved to be punished for it. I believed this, she tapped the debt note, was my only way to make it right. She slid the legal printout over. But this was never about the money, was it? This was about the failure. You couldn't face it. You couldn't face the fact that our dream was gone, that you were helpless to stop it. It was easier to make me a prisoner than to be my partner in grief. It was easier to punish me than to punish the market. You didn't create a repayment plan, Theodore. You created a cage so you'd have someone to blame for your own pain. My throat was dry. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot, dismantling the fortress of logic and righteousness I had built around myself for 3 years. She took a deep breath. The 10-year term is over. The work is done. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. She was informing me that my authority over her was an illusion, and she was simply no longer willing to participate in the fantasy. The foundation of my world crumbled into dust. You can't, I stammered the words, feeling weak and pathetic. You signed it. You agreed. I agreed to an illegal contract under emotional duress, she said, her voice cutting through my defense like glass. It's worthless, and so is this arrangement. And then I broke. The cold, calculating man who had run her life for 3 years dissolved, replaced by the terrified, humiliated man from 2021. The facade cracked, and everything I had suppressed came pouring out. They laughed at me. I choked out the memory as raw as if it were yesterday. My family, your father, they all said I was a fool to trust you with it. When it was gone, all I could hear was their judgment. I lost my grandfather's legacy. I lost our future. I had nothing. No power, no control. You were the only thing I could control. The confession hung in the air, ugly and pathetic. I hadn't punished her for losing the money. I had punished her for making me feel weak. Isabella listened to my entire confession without flinching. When I was done panting and exposed, she simply nodded. I know, she said softly. She turned and walked to the door. I'm leaving Theodore. I'm leaving this job, and I'm leaving this house. I'm going to stay with a friend. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. When you figure out if you want a wife or a hostage, you know where to find me. But the Isabella who signed that note is gone for good. And then she walked out, leaving me alone in the office with the wreckage. The debt note and the law that nullified it sat on my desk, a perfect tombstone for our marriage. The 10-year term was over, terminated unilaterally at year 3. The days that followed were the quietest I have ever known. It wasn't the charged silence of tension or the cold silence of routine. It was the absolute, deafening silence of absence. Her presence, even as a subdued employee, had filled a space I never acknowledged. Now the house was just an empty, echoing box. I learned through a mutual friend that she had an interview. That client, Marcus Sterling, had been so impressed with her work that he'd reached out to her directly after I told him she was no longer with the company. He wanted to hire her for a senior strategist role. The portfolio she used was the work she did for him, the work I had tried to claim as my own. Her victory wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming her identity, her talent, and her future, all the things I had tried to strip away. She was free. I was the one left in the prison I had built, alone in my office, surrounded by a successful business that felt utterly meaningless. My victory had been my control over her. Without her, my victory was nothing but a pile of ash. That evening, I took the debt note from my desk. I walked out to the small fire pit in the backyard, the one we had bought together years ago, with plans for summer nights that never came. I unfolded the paper one last time, looking at her signature, a scar from a wound I had inflicted on us both. I tossed it into the pit and lit a match. The paper curled, turning brown at the edges before catching fire. The flames consumed my signature, then hers. The words outlining her 10 years of servitude glowed bright orange before disappearing into black, floating away into the night sky. The $500,000 was gone forever. That was a fact. But as I watched the last ember of that note die out, I finally understood. The financial debt was a ghost. The real debt, the moral debt, was now mine and mine alone. And I had no idea how I was ever going to begin to repay it.